Today we're doing lesson 6.2, radicals and rational exponents. All right, so as a quick review, who can tell me what a radical is? Does anybody remember what a radical is, or what's another name for a radical? Okay, your square root symbol is also called a radical. Okay, so when we're talking about radicals, we're talking about numbers that have, or problems that have a square root symbol in them. Okay, does anybody remember what a rational number is? Anybody remember what a rational, because today we're going to have rational exponents in our problem. But what is a rational number? Rational numbers are numbers that can be written in fraction form. So in these problems today, when we have rational exponents, it means we're going to have exponents that are fractions. Okay? So we've got radicals and we've got rationals. Now, our essential question, how can you write and evaluate an nth root of a number? Now, you are all very familiar with a problem that looks like this. How would we, Renier, how would you read this radical right here? How would you read that? The square root of 4. So, what root are we looking for if our problem looks like this? He just said the square root. So what number is represented by the word square? 2. Okay, so when you have a radical and there's nothing sitting right here, it is an understood 2. All right, but what happens when they start sitting other numbers on that little lip? A 3. Or they start sitting a 7. Okay? So this is where we're going to find more than just the square root of numbers. We're going to find the third root, and we're going to find the 7th root, and we're going to find the 10th root. Okay? So whatever number sits outside or right on that lip of the radical, okay, that is our root. All right? Now, you've got some information here, and this is the piece of paper that you glued into your notebook. If your root, your n is odd, that means you have one real root. You have one answer. Okay? If your n is even, if you're looking for an even root, then you've got 2 real roots or 2 answers. Okay? But if your n is even and your a equals 0. Now let's talk about a. If we look up here in our little formula in radical form, a is that number that's either under the radical, or in rational form, a is your base. Okay? So if your root is even and your a is equal to 0, then you are back to one number, one real root or one answer. And if your root is even but a is less than 0, now what numbers are less than 0? Negative. So if n is even, so if your root is even but your a value is negative, then you have no real root. Okay? You can't get an answer. So this is just a little reference sheet. The main place I want you guys to focus is right here. And that's why if you've got your highlighter, okay, or you can grab a highlighter, that's what I want you to highlight. Okay? We've got radical form and we've got rational form. And what we're going to focus on today is going back and forth between the two forms. All right? Past that, you're putting your work in the calculator and you're going to let the calculator do the work for you. But you have to know how to go between the two forms. All right? Now, if we're going to do that, let's look at this a little bit closer. All right, in radical form, we've got our radical. You've got your root sitting right out here on the outside, and you've got your real number underneath the radical. But look what happens when we change it into rational form. All right, look at a underneath the radical for just a minute. What power is that a raised to? If there's nothing here, it's raised to the understood what power? No, you learned this yesterday. There's an understood 1. So look at the numerator in rational form. All right. First of all, hopefully you can notice your exponent is a fraction. So we've got to know, what is my numerator going to be? What's my denominator going to be? So your numerator is the power. What is that number under the radical? What power is it raised to? That's my numerator. And guess what your denominator is always going to be? Look at the denominator in the rational form. It's an n. What does n stand for? Your root, right? You guys with me? Here's n right there. What does n stand for? Your root. So when you take a problem from radical form to rational form, the numerator is going to be the power. What is the a value? What power is it raised to? And then the denominator is always going to be the root that you're looking for. All right, now, some of us are visual, so let's go do a problem. All right, find the indicated real nth root of a. Okay, we're going to actually put this in radical form, then we're going to change it to rational form, and then we're going to put it into our calculator. All right, so if my n is equal to 3 and my a is equal to negative 125, we know that radical form is the nth root of a. Okay, so we're going to plug in what we know. What root are they asking us to find this time? Class, what root are they asking us to find this time? 3. So we're finding the third root. So outside the radical, sitting right there on the lip, we're going to put the 3. And then what is our a value? What are we finding the third root of? Class? Class? Very good. All right. So here it is in radical form. All right. Radical form. Now, let's change it into rational form. So what's our base going to be if we're changing this into rational form? Okay. Now, it's a negative number. So remember, we put negative numbers in parentheses so that we know the base is negative 125. All right, we know that the exponent is going to be a fraction, so we just got to decide what the numerator is and what the denominator is. Now, looking back at negative 125 underneath the radical, what is negative 125 raised to? What power? There's nothing there, so it's an understood what? 1. All right, so what is the numerator of my rational form going to be? A 1. Perfect. Now, the root is my denominator. So what is the root of this problem?
3.
Okay, are we sure?
Yeah.
Want to make sure we're sure. Remember, the root is always the number sitting right there on the lip of the radical, right outside. So what is our denominator going to be? 3. So this is the same problem, but in rational form. Now, take your calculators and let me teach you how to plug this into the calculator. All right. First of all, we know we have to put it in parentheses because it is a negative 125. So we're putting negative 125 into parentheses. And then do you see the button that has the X and the little square? The exponent is just a square. We hit that button because it allows us to enter any exponent we want. All right. We don't hit the X squared button because that would just square it. We have to raise it to the 1/3 power. So once we hit that little X with the square, go hit your fraction button because we got to make the exponent a fraction, and then we're going to plug in a 1, push the arrow to take us down into the denominator, and make our denominator a 3. And when you hit equals, what do you get? So your answer is -5. Now let's take the same problem, but let's plug it into the calculator in radical form. All right. So let's do this one right here in the calculator. Do you see the X squared button? Again, the X, not squared, I'm sorry, the X button with the little square. You see it? Do you see above it where there is a radical and you've got a little square on the outside and a square on the inside? That's the button we need so that we can plug in the root that we want. So we're going to hit the shift button. Then we're going to hit that X raised to the box because that will give us, do you see how that gives us the radical that we need? So what's the root we're going to plug in? 3. We hit the arrow to the right. It'll take us under the radical. And what number is going under the radical? Now, it's a negative, so plug it in parentheses. All right. Anytime we plug a negative number into the calculator, we want to put it in parentheses. And then we hit equals. And what do we get? The exact same answer. All right. Now, I have no problem. As long as you can go from one form to the other, I don't care which form you plug it into the calculator in. I'm going to let you choose. Whichever one you understand or like better, you choose. But I do have to make sure that you can go from one form to the other. That's the skill we're trying to perfect today. All right, so let's look at letter B. Actually, I want you guys to work with your partner and do letter B real quick. Cam, let's put this in radical form first. What is the root that goes on the outside? 6. And what number goes under the radical? 64. All right. So there it is in radical form. Now, Anthony, let's take it into rational form. What's the base? 64. And we're going to raise it to what power? All right, and be careful. Under the radical, the 64 is raised to an understood what? Underneath the radical, 64 right here is raised to an understood power of what? There's no exponent there, so it's an understood... Anybody?
1.
It's an understood 1. Okay, so Anthony, what's my numerator going to be down here? 1. Okay, the numerator is always the power that's under the radical, the exponent that's under the radical. So 1, and then what's the denominator going to be? 6. The root is always my denominator. So there it is in rational form. And then we're going to just plug that into our calculator. Again, totally up to you which form you want to stick in. But what was your answer when you put it into your calculator? 2. Very good. Now, here's what you're finding. Okay? They wanted you to find the 6th root of 64. Do you know what that means? It means what number times itself 6 times will give you 64. All right? So 2. Doesn't that make sense? If I do 2 to the 6th power, I'm going to get 64. So that's what you're finding. What number times itself, however many times the root is, will give you the number that's underneath. All right? So that is what I want you to understand what you're finding. Now, let's look at example 2. Whatever form it starts in, we're going to put it in the opposite form, and then we're going to plug it in. Again, I don't care which way you plug it in, but let's make sure you can go from one form to the other. All right, looking at letter A, what form is letter A in? It's in radical form, so we need to change it to rational. Now, if you're paying really close attention, we've already done this problem. So, negative 125 is my base, and it's going to be raised to what power? 1/3, and we already know that is negative 5. All right? Awesome. Now, letter B. Joseph, what form is letter B in?
That's in rational form.
Rational form. So we need to put it in radical form. Now, this is the first time we've done this, so be very careful. What's going under the radical, Joseph?
64.
Careful. Negative 64. And I'm going to keep it in parentheses because I want to remember when I plug it into the calculator to keep it in parentheses. All right, now here's where you got to be careful. That negative 64 is being raised to what power? The 2. Remember the numerator, and if you want to add this to your notes, the numerator is my power under the radical, and the 3 is my what? The n, or the root. So the 3 sits on the outside. All right, so that's going from rational form to radical form. The base goes under the radical, the numerator becomes the exponent of the number under the radical, and the denominator is my root. All right, now plug it into your calculator. Again, doesn't matter to me whichever form you like best. You can plug it into your calculator that way. But what is your final answer going to be? 16. Very good. All right, letter C. Andrew, what form is letter C in? Rational. So we're going to take it and put it into radical. All right, LJ, what's going under the radical? 9 to the 5th power, and the root is 2. Now, we can put the 2 or we can leave the 2 off because this is the square root of, okay? But this time, 9 to the 5th is under the radical, and the root is 2. So let's put it in our calculator, and we can use the good old-fashioned square root button if we want because, again, the root is 2. And we have 9 to the 5th power, and what do we get as our answer? Good job. All right, letter D. Blake, what form is letter D in? Nope. I thought you were going to say it. They both start with RA. Rational, so we got to put it into radical. All right, what's under the radical? To what power?
To the fourth. Third.
The numerator is always the power underneath. And what is the root this time? What's the root?
4.
The 4 is the root. Very good. So 256 to the third power is under the radical. The root I'm looking for is the fourth root. You plug it into your calculator, what does it give you? 64. Awesome job, guys. All right, so remember, I'm going to be grading more on can you go from one form to the other than just the right answer. You're going to say, oh, but I got the right answer. Great, but can you go from rational form to radical form or from radical form to rational form? All right, now let's look at the very last one, real life. Finding the annual inflation rate. And listen, I've given you the formula. Okay, the inflation rate is R equals, and I've also identified for you what the F and the P stand for. Okay, F is the new amount, P is the original amount, and then of course we're raising it to the 1/nth. N is your years, okay, your amount of time in years, and then minus 1. So the average cost of college tuition increases from $8,500. Is that my original amount or my new amount? Original. So that's going in the denominator in place of P. And it increases to $13,500. So if that's my new amount, where is that going in the problem? In the numerator. All right. So that is my new amount. And that is over a period of 8 years. So it's going to be raised to the 1/8. N is 8. And then we're going to subtract 1. Now, we can do the work in the parentheses first. We can do 13,500 divided by 8,500. And then we can raise that. We hit the X with the square button. We can raise that to the power of 1/8. Hit the equal button. And then we subtract 1. And hopefully you get something like 0.059, right? But it says, find the annual inflation rate to the nearest 1/10 of a percent. So this is a decimal. How do we change a decimal to a percent? We're going back to 7th grade right now. How do we change the decimal to a percent?
Oh, you move the decimal.
You move the decimal 2 times to the right. And if they want it to the nearest 1/10, what is 5.9 going to actually round to? Now, we're going to use a little squiggly equal sign because that means about or approximately. Okay, this is not an exact answer, so we're going to use the squiggly mark and we're going to do 6.0%. And that is lesson 6.2.